The small town bustled with its usual morning energy. Cars rolled steadily through the main street, their horns honking impatiently as people rushed to work. Shops opened their doors, and children in backpacks hurried toward school. In the middle of it all, Emily Carter, a plus-sized woman in her early 30s, walked with her head lowered, clutching a canvas bag against her chest. She was used to the whispers that followed her. "She's too big," some said under their breath. Others didn't bother to whisper. She had learned to keep walking, her face calm, while her heart carried the weight. Emily wasn't poor, exactly, but she lived simply. She worked part-time at the local bakery, her hands always dusted with flour, her smile quiet but genuine. Yet, in this town, her body seemed to matter more than her kindness. Every glance reminded her she didn't fit their picture of beauty. At times she felt invisible, and at other times far too visible, mocked by stares she pretended not to notice. Still, she kept her head high, moving through the town square, as though the weight of judgment didn't press on her shoulders every single day. That morning, as Emily reached the corner by the bank, she spotted an old man standing uncertainly at the edge of the busy street. His back was bent, his hands trembling as he leaned heavily on a wooden cane. Cars whizzed by without slowing, drivers too impatient to let him cross. People walked past him too, some glancing briefly before turning away. Emily paused, her chest tightening. She recognized that look in his eyes: hesitation, fear, the quiet plea for someone to see him. No one else seemed to notice, or maybe they simply chose not to. Emily's instinct moved her before she thought. She shifted her bag to one arm and approached him, her voice soft but steady. "Do you need help, sir?" The old man looked up at her, his eyes cloudy but kind. Relief flickered across his face. "Yes," he rasped. "I'm afraid I can't manage this traffic on my own." Emily smiled gently, offering her arm. "Then let's do it together." For a moment, he hesitated, unused to kindness, perhaps, but then his wrinkled hand settled gratefully on her arm, his cane tapping softly against the pavement. They stepped into the street together. Cars slowed reluctantly, some drivers glaring as if the inconvenience were a personal offense. Emily ignored them, keeping her focus on the man's careful steps. Her solid frame offered him stability, and he leaned on her without fear of her faltering. The world seemed to narrow to the steady rhythm of their walk, his cane tapping, her shoes clicking, their breath moving in sync. By the time they reached the opposite curb, the old man's face was bright with gratitude. "Thank you, young lady," he said, his voice trembling. "You've done more for me than you know." Emily shook her head, embarrassed. "It was nothing," she murmured, but his gaze lingered on her, as though he saw something others missed. She felt her cheeks warm under the weight of it. Most people saw only her size, her body, her silence. This man, frail but dignified, seemed to see past all of that. "Nothing?" he said softly. "To me, it was everything." His words echoed in her chest, stirring something long buried. She nodded, adjusting her bag. "Take care, sir." With that, she prepared to leave, never imagining their paths would cross again. Behind her, whispers began to ripple. Townsfolk who had ignored the old man before now muttered among themselves. "Why would she bother?" One woman scoffed. "Probably just wants attention." A man chuckled cruelly, looked like a whale guiding a minnow. Emily's shoulders stiffened, but she kept walking. She was used to the cruelty of strangers. It was the price of existing in her body, but still, their words stung. She bit her lip, holding her head higher, determined not to let them see her break. What Emily didn't know was that the old man lingered at the corner, his eyes narrowing as he overheard the comments. A spark of disappointment flashed across his face, not for himself, but for the town. He had lived here for decades, had built an empire of farmland that supplied most of their stores and restaurants, and yet he saw clearly how they treated one of their own. His wrinkled hand tightened around his cane. In that moment, he resolved not to forget the kindness of the woman who had stopped when no one else did. Later that day, Emily returned to the bakery. The scent of warm bread greeted her, comforting in its familiarity. She tied her apron around her waist and busied herself with trays of pastries. Customers filed in, some offering polite smiles, others avoiding her gaze altogether. She had grown used to this rhythm, working quietly, serving others, slipping back into the background. But her thoughts kept drifting to the old man's words. To me, it was everything. She repeated them silently, like a secret she wasn't ready to share. Meanwhile, the old man returned to his farmhouse at the edge of town. The land stretched wide and green, fields heavy with crops ready for harvest. Workers nodded respectfully as he passed, but he barely noticed. His mind was on the woman who had helped him cross the street. Emily Carter, he had heard someone call her. He smiled faintly, committing the name to memory. He had always believed character revealed itself in small moments, and she had proven more in 5 minutes than most did in a lifetime. The next morning, Emily's routine repeated. She walked to work with her bag, her head lowered, her body absorbing the familiar sting of whispers. But something inside her felt lighter, steadier. The memory of the old man's gratitude warmed her like sunlight against the autumn chill. She didn't know why it mattered so much, but it did. For once, someone had seen her, truly seen her, and not for her body, but for her kindness. That thought carried her through the day. 2 days later, the bakery door chimed as the old man entered. Conversations hushed as townsfolk turned to stare. His presence commanded attention, though many didn't immediately recognize him. He walked with his cane, his steps deliberate, his eyes sharp, despite the frailty of age. Emily froze behind the counter, her heart leaping. She hadn't expected to see him again. He smiled faintly when their eyes met. "Good morning, Miss Carter." The room seemed to hold its breath. Nobody called her that. Nobody spoke her name with such respect. Emily blinked, startled. "You remembered me." The old man chuckled softly. "How could I forget? You were the only one who stopped." He placed a hand on the counter, leaning slightly. "I owe you more than a simple thank you." Emily shook her head quickly, her cheeks burning. "You don't owe me anything. I was just being human," he finished gently. His gaze swept the room, catching the stares of those who had mocked her. Many turned away, embarrassed. Something too many here had forgotten how to be. The whispers grew louder, puzzled. Why is he talking to her? What's going on? Emily shifted nervously, wishing she could vanish. But the old man continued, his voice carrying. "This woman showed me kindness when no one else would. That tells me more about her than it does about any of you." Emily's throat tightened, her eyes stinging. She wasn't used to being defended, least of all in public. She lowered her gaze, clutching the edge of the counter, unsure how to handle the attention. "May I have a loaf of bread?" the old man asked kindly. Emily nodded, fumbling to wrap it. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of his words. She handed it to him quietly, but he pressed the bill into her palm, far more than the bread cost. "Keep the change," he said firmly. She tried to protest, but his gaze silenced her. "You'll understand later." With that, he left the bakery, his cane tapping steadily, leaving the room buzzing with speculation. The moment the door closed, the whispers turned sharp again. Why would he give her that much? Was she hiding? Maybe he feels sorry for her. Emily flushed, her stomach knotting. She hated that even kindness turned into gossip. She slipped the bill into the register and returned to her work, forcing herself to focus. But her mind whirled with confusion. Why had he spoken so strongly for her? Why had he given her so much money? And why did it feel like something larger was unfolding? That night, as Emily walked home, she spotted the old man again, this time in a sleek black car parked near her apartment building. He rolled down the window, his expression thoughtful. "Miss Carter," he called. She hesitated, surprised. "Yes?" He gestured to the seat beside him. "Would you join me for a ride? There's something I'd like to show you." Her heart pounded. A dozen doubts filled her mind. What would people say? Was it safe? What could he possibly want? But his eyes were steady, his tone sincere. Against her instincts to retreat, she nodded and climbed in. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding through the quiet streets. Emily clasped her hands in her lap, nervous. The old man studied her for a moment before speaking. You don't know who I am, do you? She shook her head. No, sir. Just that you needed help. His lips curved into a faint smile. I am Henry Whitfield. My family owns nearly half the farmland in this county. Some call me the richest man in town, but none of that mattered to you, did it? Emily's breath caught. The whispers in town had always mentioned his name, but she had never imagined it was him. No, she said softly. It didn't matter. You just needed help. Henry nodded, satisfaction in his eyes. Exactly. And that's why I wanted to speak to you. People reveal who they are in small moments. You showed me kindness when no one else could be bothered. That tells me everything I need to know about your heart. Emily's cheeks flushed hot. No one had ever spoken to her like this, not with pity, not with mockery, but with genuine respect. The car slowed as it turned down a long driveway, fields stretching endlessly on either side. In the distance, lights glowed from a sprawling farmhouse. Emily stared, stunned. Why are we here? She whispered. Henry smiled faintly. Because, Miss Carter, I believe you deserve more than what this town has given you, and I think it's time you saw what kindness can bring. Emily's pulse raced as the farmhouse loomed closer. She had no idea her life was about to change forever. The farmhouse stood tall against the fading light, its windows glowing warmly like beacons in the dusk. Emily Carter stepped out of the car with hesitation, her shoes crunching against the gravel driveway. She clutched her bag tightly to her chest, her round shoulders tense. Why am I here? She asked softly. Henry Whitfield leaned on his cane, his gaze steady. Because I want to show you something, Miss Carter. Something that most in this town have forgotten gratitude. His words settled over her like a blanket, but her nerves still fluttered wildly. They walked slowly toward the white porch. The farmhouse smelled of fresh wood and hay carried in by the evening breeze. Emily's heart pounded, her steps awkward beside Henry's measured pace. Inside, the house was grand but not ostentatious. Family portraits lined the walls, bookshelves sagged with years of use, and the fireplace crackled gently. Emily stood in the entryway, feeling too big, too out of place, like a stranger in a world that wasn't hers. Henry noticed her hesitation and offered a small smile. You belong here more than you think, he said gently. He led her into a spacious kitchen, where a kettle whistled softly on the stove. A housekeeper greeted Henry warmly, then glanced at Emily with mild surprise. This is Miss Carter, Henry explained. She's the reason I'm here tonight. The housekeeper's eyes widened with understanding, and Emily flushed with embarrassment. She had never been introduced like that before, like someone important. She shifted nervously, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. Henry gestured to the table. Sit, please. We'll have tea. They settled at the table, the old man pouring tea with steady hands despite his tremors. Emily wrapped her fingers around the warm cup, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Henry studied her for a long moment before speaking. Emily, people in this town, they don't see you clearly. They judge what's on the surface and never look deeper. I've lived long enough to know that character is revealed not in words but in actions. And you, my dear, showed more character in 5 minutes than most show in a lifetime. Emily's throat tightened. She looked down at her cup, steam blurring her vision. I only helped you cross the street, she said softly. Anyone would have. Henry shook his head firmly. No, anyone could have, but they didn't. They turned their backs. You didn't. That matters. His voice carried weight, each word carving itself into her heart. She blinked rapidly, fighting tears. She had never been praised like this, not for her kindness, not for her courage. It felt both overwhelming and unreal. After tea, Henry guided her through the farmhouse. He showed her rooms filled with memories, photographs of his late wife, trophies from harvest festivals, and ledgers detailing years of hard work. This farm, he said quietly, has been my life, but I'm not as strong as I once was. And what matters now isn't money or land, it's the people who will carry on after me. He looked at her then, his gaze piercing. Emily froze, her breath catching. Why are you telling me this? She whispered. Henry's smile was faint but sincere. Because I see something in you. Strength, compassion, a heart that refuses to look away when someone needs help. That's rare, Emily. That's what I want to leave my legacy. To not greed, not cruelty, but kindness. Emily's chest tightened with disbelief. You can't mean me, she stammered. I'm nobody. Henry shook his head slowly. No, you're the one person who stopped, and that makes you somebody. His words wrapped around her like a promise, stirring a hope she had buried long ago. The next morning, Emily awoke in her modest apartment, convinced the night before had been a dream. But when she arrived at the bakery, the whispers were louder than ever. She was seen with Henry Whitfield. Why would he bother with her? Maybe she's trying to get his money. Their cruel laughter stung, but Emily forced herself to keep working, her hands steady as she arranged pastries. Still, her mind replayed Henry's words over and over. You're somebody. She clung to them like armor against the gossip. Days passed, and Henry visited the bakery again. This time, he walked straight to the counter, ignoring the stares. Emily, he said warmly, I need your help on the farm. Her eyes widened. My help? He nodded. There are tasks I can't manage anymore, and I trust you. Murmurs rippled through the shop, sharp with disbelief. Emily's cheeks burned, but Henry's steady gaze silenced her doubts. She nodded. I'll come. The decision felt terrifying and exhilarating all at once. At the farm, Emily discovered a new rhythm. She helped organize workers, carried baskets of produce, and even learned how to guide the livestock with a steady hand. At first, she felt clumsy and out of place, her size making her self-conscious. But the workers soon noticed her determination, her willingness to try, her laughter that carried across the fields. Slowly, their skepticism faded, replaced by respect. For the first time in her life, Emily felt useful in a way that went beyond serving or being tolerated. She felt needed. Henry often watched her quietly, his eyes shining with approval. One afternoon, as they walked the fields together, he said, Do you see how they look at you now? Not with mockery, but with trust. That's what true leadership is, earning respect by showing it first. Emily blinked back tears. She had never imagined being seen like this. All her life, she had been underestimated, pushed aside. But here, in the golden light of the farm, she was blooming into someone she had always longed to be. The town, however, remained cruel. Rumors spread like wildfire. She's manipulating him. She's only there for money. Emily tried to ignore it, but the words gnawed at her late at night. Henry noticed her sadness and rested a trembling hand on her arm. Let them talk, he said firmly. They only reveal their own emptiness. You keep showing who you are, and the truth will outshine every lie. His faith in her became her anchor, steadying her when doubt threatened to pull her under. Weeks later, Henry invited Emily to a town meeting at the community hall. She hesitated, dreading the whispers, but he insisted, I want them to see what I see. The hall was packed, the air buzzing with curiosity. Henry walked to the front, leaning on his cane, and began to speak. I owe my life to a woman most of you have ignored. Emily Carter showed me more humanity than I've seen in years, and I intend to entrust her with part of my estate. Gasps filled the room. All eyes turned to Emily, who stood frozen in disbelief. The whispers rose into chaos. Her? Impossible. Why her? Emily's face burned, but Henry raised his hand for silence. Because when everyone else turned away, she stepped forward. That is the kind of heart I want remembered when I'm gone. His voice carried through the hall, unshakable. Emily's chest ached with emotion. She wanted to shrink under the weight of their stares, but Henry's hand on her shoulder grounded her. She stood a little taller, her round frame no longer a source of shame, but a symbol of her strength. After the meeting, townsfolk approached her hesitantly. Some offered awkward congratulations. Others muttered bitterly under their breath. But one by one, their gazes began to shift. She was no longer invisible, no longer just the fat girl. She was Emily Carter, the woman who had shown kindness when no one else would, the woman Henry Whitfield trusted above all others. The change was subtle but undeniable, and for the first time, Emily felt the weight of respect settling on her shoulders. Back at the farm, Henry grew weaker, but his spirit remained strong. He spent hours with Emily, teaching her about the land, the crops, the legacy he hoped she would carry. She listened carefully, absorbing every word. Each lesson felt like a gift, a piece of himself he was entrusting to her. "Promise me," he said one evening, his voice frail, "that you will keep kindness at the heart of everything you do." Emily clasped his hand tightly, tears in her eyes. "I promise," she whispered. When Henry passed weeks later, the town mourned deeply. But for Emily, the loss was personal, sharp as a blade. She stood at his graveside, her body trembling with grief. Yet, even in sorrow, she felt his presence, a steady reminder of the man who had seen her when no one else would. As the townsfolk lowered their heads in respect, Emily realized she was no longer alone. Henry's trust had bound her to something larger than herself, a legacy that would outlast both whispers and cruelty. Reading of his will shook the town to its core. Henry had left Emily a portion of his farmland, enough to secure her future and place her firmly within the fabric of the community. Gasps filled the room as the lawyer announced her name. Emily sat in stunned silence, tears slipping down her cheeks. She hadn't asked for any of it. All she had done was help a man cross the street. But Henry's voice echoed in her memory. "Anyone could have, but they didn't. You did." At first, some protested, but over time, the truth settled. Emily proved herself daily, running the farm with dedication and compassion. She treated workers with fairness, offered food to struggling families, and invested in the town's children. Slowly, the whispers of doubt turned into words of praise. She was no longer mocked for her size. Instead, she was admired for her heart. She had become a symbol of resilience, of kindness, of the quiet power of doing what others overlook. Years later, children in town would point to the fields and whisper, "That's Emily Carter's farm." Her name carried weight, not because of wealth, but because of the woman she had become. The plus-size woman once mocked and dismissed had changed the course of her life and her town with a single act of kindness. And though she never sought recognition, Emily lived every day remembering Henry's words that character is revealed in action and that even the smallest gesture can change everything.